Now, it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Andrea Cattaneo. Andrea is a senior economist here at FAO, leading the team that produces its annual flagship report on the state of food and agriculture, which, as Jen had mentioned, has focused in its last 2 editions on the true cost of food. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone, friends, colleagues. It's great to have you here at FAO. Some of you have traveled from very far for this summit focusing on scaling and implementation of TCA. Obviously, I follow on Jen and Adele's kind of introductions, wanting to thank Jen and her team for organizing it and making it so easy for us at FAO to be part of this. I also want to thank the FAO team that worked behind the scenes, Alejandra, who was the liaison with Jen's team, and you for taking the time to come and discuss in these couple of days. I'm a little bit intimidated by my own picture. It's the only one I had in high resolution. I do have one somewhere I do smile, but never mind. First of all, well, I apologize for the weather. We do our best. Rome in April is usually a nice place to be. Hopefully tonight it won't be raining when we go out to the restaurant. But really, in my intervention, I wanted to make 3 points that I would like to kind of touch upon. One is, well, what is FAO doing in relation to true cost accounting? We came a little bit late to the table. There was a community that was already pretty well-defined that was building momentum. And so I think it's good for us to share where we've gone. Both Jen and Adele has mentioned the State of Food and Agriculture report that my team led for the last couple of years. Then the second point is kind of reflect on scaling implementation. And the third is where do we go from here? So first, as Jen mentioned, I mean, it was quite a statement for FAO to have 2 consecutive reports of the State of Food and Agriculture. The State of Food and Agriculture is the oldest report in the UN system. It started in 1947, and it was the first time that there was a topic that was dealt with for 2 years in a row. So I'm not going to go into the details of the SOFA report. I mean, I think most of you already read it. Some of you were heavily involved in the production, in fact, of the 2023 report, either in the advisory group or by writing background papers for that report. And it did provide, an overview of TCA that tried to be, let's say, accessible to a public that wasn't aware of it. But it also provided initial estimates of hidden costs for 154 countries. And it added up, that those hidden costs added up to about 10% of global GDP, $12 trillion annually. So that's a number that has been thrown around quite a bit, and that is consistent with other kind of global TCA analyses. So, and this was part of a kind of a concerted effort to bring TCA into the mainstream as something that could be done anywhere in the world. It was also an invitation to improve on those estimates and for countries to reflect on how they might be useful. We at FAO learned a lot in the process of preparing those 2 reports. One result that came as a surprise is that TCA was useful not just for high-income countries worried about health and the environment. We found that hidden costs of agri-food systems were the highest in low-income countries, reaching an average of 27% of GDP, with peaks above 50% in countries like Madagascar and Mozambique. So these are driven by social hidden costs associated with undernutrition and agri-food systems that fail to provide livelihoods for a large share of those they employ. So I think this drove home for us that the hidden costs of our agri-food systems touch the lives of people everywhere around the world. When we started this journey, we didn't have that sense, that perception. It's in different ways on different issues, but it is a topic that is relevant for policymakers, private sector, and institutions around the world. So in 2024, we provided a bit more detail on the health hidden costs, which were the bulk of the global hidden costs. And a number of case studies were done, developing stakeholder-driven scenarios and analyzing how hidden costs would change. At the same time, the government of Switzerland in collaboration with FAO, undertook a case study and later a modeling analysis to examine policy scenarios. So we have the honor of having Saskia Sanders sharing her thoughts on that experience. So I do not want to give anything away I don't want to take away her thunder, but I will say that it was extremely stimulating for the FAO team to interact with Swiss experts and policymakers. There's also been interest on the part of other countries. For example, Brazil is setting up a group of researchers to analyze the SOFA methodology and the results for Brazil. And that is kicking off at the end of April. And then there's a workshop that's planned, I think in Piracicaba in October to kind of go deeper and see how these results can be used. We also have ongoing FAO work looking at global modeling scenarios that analyze the true costs of agri-food systems under different scenarios, different policy scenarios. And this is an important continuation of the work that SOFA began because it goes beyond calculating the hidden costs and into analysis of what is feasible to abate. One thing is to say that there's a very high hidden cost. A totally different thing is, okay, we can adopt this policy, this measure, this investment to reduce that cost. So that's another area where we are moving forward. Also, one of SOFA's functions internally is to provide a unified corporate vision to its staff on big themes. Some years we succeed, some years we don't. But interestingly, when I go to meetings at FAO, about transforming agri-food systems, I hear TCA is mentioned in reference to the importance of the different hidden costs. So that to me is a success internally because it shows that this approach of trying to kind of make people aware and normalize mainstream TCA is having its first effects. So it's an important part, internalizing these concepts. And I think only time really will tell if this is a passing effect or a lasting impact on how we do business inside FAO. It is certainly shaping some programmatic perspectives inside FAO right now. I mean, as I was talking with management. So what have we learned as part of this process in terms of its relevance for scaling implementation? And here I come to my second point. So first of all, FAO's contribution was just one piece in the broader puzzle of how to scale up TCA approaches. And it built on work that had already been done by you, the TCA community. So I think that's an important point to make. So clearly we learned a lot from the work that preceded the SOFA. One example above all is, I guess, the agri-food studies, for example, that really gave us what were the starting point for how we looked at the issues and framed the SOFA report. So we learned that scaling can occur through multiple kind of smaller scale projects or through fewer higher policy level interventions. Both are needed. And which route to take will depend on context and circumstances. I'm guessing that finding that balance will be part of the discussion in the coming 2 days. So the SOFA 2024 report highlights the need to bridge sectoral divides, which I think is very clear to the TCA community, kind of this need to align policies across health, agriculture, and the environment, and ensure that the benefits and costs of change are equitably distributed. This is challenging. I think it's when you bring it to policymakers, they are interested, but they're also concerned. I mean, what this means for prices of food, for example, that comes up when we talk with members here at FAO, but also the issue of how to distribute costs. Who are the beneficiaries and who bears the burden of transforming food systems? So TCA helps to identify the hidden costs and how these are dispersed in these value chains to ensure that these costs are acknowledged and addressed fairly. So that is an important contribution of TCA. It also identifies many entry points. I mean, in the SOFA report for 2024, for example, I mean, collective action by producers who cooperated, for example, better regulatory frameworks, these can help redistribute costs and support sustainable practices. Also, consumers and institutions have significant purchasing power and can drive demand for sustainable products. So the key is, what mechanisms need to be put in place? Is it repurposing of agricultural subsidies? Is it adoption of TCA in public procurement, such as for hospitals and school feeding programs. I think that is, kind of focusing in on what is scalable is quite important. Another lesson learned, which you probably already know, is that active stakeholder participation is key. Adele put out the general principles of TCA, and one of them was, I don't remember the name, but it was actually stakeholder engagement, right? The one at the bottom. So when I say kind of active stakeholder participation, I mean that stakeholders need to see TCA as a solution to a problem they're experiencing. That will not always be an easy sell. For us, I mean, the SOFA report was, one step removed from activities in the field. So I think that makes it a little bit of a even more difficult sell at times with policymakers. But I do want to kind of highlight what I consider was a success of the SOFA report in this area and where I think instead we failed. So the Swiss case study that I mentioned in connection to SOFA, I think is a case in point of when things work. There was a policy process in place that mandated to analyze the true cost of Swiss agri-food systems. So the SOFA analysis was meeting a need that had already been identified by Swiss policymakers. It just came kind of at the right time. That led to a process that was really completely country-led, and that continues internally independently of FAO. For us, so that was a successful collaboration. For SOFA 2024, we also commissioned some case studies where stakeholder engagement was incorporated for 6 countries, but that were not as successful, in my view. The terms of reference were fulfilled. It was a job well done through stakeholder consultations on scenarios and hidden costs. But the outcome were background papers that did not get that traction and start a process. So that's where I think it's important to, when one has an idea, a vision, to make sure that it is catering to a need that is already where there's some awareness, right, and readiness to accept it. And I think this is a broader issue in times in development policy, where we go and we push for solutions that are not solving the problems that people are facing, or that may create other problems. And then, once a project ends, these things are abandoned. And now my third point is, like, where do we go from here? The world as we know it is changing at an unprecedented pace, creating quite a bit of uncertainty for all stakeholders, be they government, private sector, civil society, or philanthropy. Things have changed radically since this summit was starting to be organized. I mean, Jen and I were talking about it yesterday. It's like, well, when this started, I mean, we were literally in a different geopolitical and policy world. So what does this mean for scaling implementation of TCA? It is difficult to predict. For example, I would expect that in a narrow sense, TCA intervention that improves citizens' lives would find favor, such as procurement programs that buy from local farmers for a school feeding program. However, we're seeing that may not be the case if the perceived budget constraints override all other concerns. That is a problem that we will be facing in the near future. With a broader scope, I think simulating policy reform scenarios that capture existing policy preferences of policymakers that are, in power, and at the same time try to minimize hidden costs could be a possible route. However, continuing to build momentum for a TCA approach will require finding the problem for which it is a solution. Finding that active TCA client will become, I believe, more difficult, especially if applying TCA principle requires redistribution of costs and stakeholders. So I do not know where this is all going, but I do feel we need to be realistic about what is doable and will take off as a process that improves agri-food systems value at scale. And it's not about lowering ambition, but rather focusing it on what can succeed. In this respect, I really look forward to the thoughts that were collected in the TCA dialogues as part of this process, and to the diverse insights and experiences that you all bring to the table in the breakout sessions. So on that note, I will conclude by paraphrasing a couplet from a famous poem by Rudyard Kipling called If, that I first read when I was a teenager, right? And it is, if we can dream and not make dreams our master, if we can think and not make thoughts our aim, then we may succeed. So in closing, TCA has many entry points for action. I think your experience here is very valuable at a key moment in time in terms of how we move forward more generally in the transformation of agri-food systems. The challenge is identifying and executing those interventions that are scalable in a rapidly changing environment. So this convening, will surely provide new insights on these challenges and this important topic. Thank you very much.